Om Ganatimirandasya Ganagana Sarakya Chaksurun Militam Yanatajmai Shri Gurave Namaha
Ganagana
Sri
Sarakya
Chaitanya
Chaksurun
Manobhishtam
Militam Yanataj
Stapitam Yena Bhutare Swayam Rupa Karamayam Darati Soha Parantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Siyata Parakamaram Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Sha Shri Rupam Sagadatam Sahagana Raganatam Vitam Samsajevam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Paran Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishikanvitam Sam Nama Om Vishnu Paraya Krishna Pastaya Bhutare Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Tenomine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesa Sunyavadi Praskita Desatarine Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavrindam Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare. Good morning, Rob, Natasha, John, bye Bobby. Thanks for your patience. Some or other Zoom kicked me over to another account, which did not have the option of crossing over onto Facebook, but I went to the Zoom website and started all over again from scratch. Took an extra 4 minutes, but here we are back in the saddle after a hiatus of several weeks. As you know, I went to the Gita Jantri retreat at the new Navadvip Dham property in Rio Grande Valley, Texas. There were great souls there, including Sarvajaya, the person who put together the purchase of this 7,500 acre property for $55 million. Wonderful devotee. And Govinda Charan, the organizer of the famous Sadhusang festivals, disciple of Indradu Maharaj. Prahlad was there. Prahlad is from Australia, but he told me he's recently moved to New York. He's a teacher. His wife is a doctor. He's famous for his kirtans. He led many wonderful kirtans during the weekend, but he also gave two amazing classes. I learned that as well as being a great kirtan leader, he has a PhD and he's a scholar, a Vaishnav scholar of the highest order. Speaking of Vaishnav scholars of the highest order, Radhika Raman was there also. Radhika Raman, as you know, born of devotee parents, homeschooled on the Srimad Bhagavatam, graduated from Boise State University at the age of 19, I believe, as the valedictorian of the class. Got his PhD at Cambridge or Oxford, I believe, 21, and he's now the head of the religion department at Utah State University. He gave two amazing classes on the Bhagavad Gita. I traveled on Monday, and so that kind of messed up our scheduling of Bhagavatam classes that week. And then the following week, as you know, we had the Japathon, which also occurred on a Monday and kind of threw things up. And we're back in the saddle today with one little glitch, and that is that Bobby is going to the Spanish Fork Hospital this morning to get surgery on one of her eyes. 2 weeks from now, she'll go and get the second one done. Now, she has an appointment at 8:45. So I'm going to maybe end this a little early so I can take her out and draw and to where she is scheduled to get her eye surgery. If you recall, I had two of those in recent history. I had one 3 years ago and one last year. Both of them painless, both of them successful. The first more so than the second one, I would say. So it's a great procedure. In the past, before this procedure, many people, the cataracts would eclipse their vision. They would have to live out the last years of their life in blindness. But medical science has advanced to the point now that no one need go blind because of cataracts. So, bye, Bobby, who celebrated her 78th birthday yesterday. It's got many, many more years of clear seeing, visionary, focused service ahead of her, as I hope do all of us. William Griffiths has joined us also from Los Angeles. Brent, we saw him the first time. He spent the Christmas holidays in Bolivia doing welfare work down there with a family. It was great to see him back after he had been absent about as long as I had from this forum. And John Malik, appreciate your steadiness right there, jumped in from the get-go. And Govinda Dev has joined us, and Natasha also. Natasha was on the brink of going to the retreat, didn't quite make it, but if you get a chance next year. Oh, also the registration open for the Sadhu Sangh retreat, which will be in Dallas again this year over Memorial Day weekend. The registration opened yesterday, and I read that those who register the earliest are going to get the motel rooms, which are closest to the festival venue, although none of them is outside of an easy walk. So there is that. I won't be planning on going to that particular Sadhu Sangh because we've got two events competing for that weekend. I'd originally scheduled Festival of Colors in Ogden for March 25th, but then my good friend Bharat Patel, the president of the Calgary Canada Temple, said he's negotiating with the city of Calgary to have their Festival of Colors on May 25th. So should that go through, I'll have to reschedule our Ogden event. By the way, we're selling tickets very briskly for Spanish Fort. I don't recall any year in which we've sold so many tickets this early. If the weather's good, it will be a capacity crowd here on March 30th and 31st. Put that on your calendar. Come join us in the greatest Sankirtan Yajna of North America. Okay, let's dive into our topic here. We're discussing the ongoing story of Gajendra Moksha, the liberation of the elephant Gajendra. And in this verse, in the 8th chapter, 8th canto, 3rd chapter, or just beginning the chapter, and these include the prayers, 28 prayers of Gajendra. He's stressing the repetitive oral chanting of the names of the Lord. In other words, he's not recommending silent meditation. He's not recommending that we chant silently. Some circumstances, we may not have an option other than to chant silently. For instance, Bhai Bobby's going into this surgery. She'll be given a mild anesthesia. So she was obviously not going to chant out loud with the doctors and the nurses around, but in her mind, undoubtedly, the Mahan Mantra, as well as any other verses that she's committed to memory, will be playing. I remember I had surgery sometime in early 1980s in Los Angeles. The temple on Venice Boulevard is right across from Brahma Memorial Hospital. I had a tumor right here. It's called the parotid gland. Just going to turn that heater off. It's making a little bit of noise here. I had a tumor right here on the parotid gland. It was a benign tumor. And they put me under, I think what they thought was total anesthesia. Yeah, they thought I was totally under, but I wasn't. I was completely aware of everything that was going on in the surgery room. Prayers of the Brahma Samhita were running through my mind. Venam kanbantam aravinda dalayataksam bhavatam samasita buddhisangarangam kandarpikoti kamani abhishesha shobam govindam maripurusham tamahang bhajami anyani nyasya sakalendri vitimanti pashanti pantanti karyanti charam jiganti ananda chan mashaduj pala vigrahasya govindam maripurusham tamahang bhajami Chintamani Pakara Sadmashu Kalpavriksha Lakshapitu Susarabhirabhi Pavyantam Lakshmi Sahasad Brahma Sevyamanam Govindamari Purusham Tamahang Bhajami. So while I'm blissfully, in this anesthesic induced euphoric trance, and as the surgeons were going about their business, they were chatting, they were just making small talk, unaware that I was listening or able to listen. They were talking about someone after their vacation was starting, and they were headed out to Albuquerque, and he was asking the other surgeons and the assistants what would be the best route to drive to Albuquerque. And with a big hole in my head, they actually had a sheet over my head, and the only part that was open was here where they were operating. I said, well, wouldn't the quickest way to just be take 10 East? And they were like, they, if they'd have seen a ghost, they wouldn't have been more shocked. They said, "Are you awake?" I said, "I was never asleep." At the same time, by chanting the mantras and remember the Lord, I felt no pain. So Bobby may do a little silent chanting this morning as I had done at that occasion, but mostly whenever we have the ability, it's much more effective to chant, number one, audibly, and number two, repeatedly. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. It's by repetition, not just that we learn something, it's by repetition, something becomes part of us. We used to have many dramas, not so much recently with the onset of the autumnal years. But I found that when I was to learn a part for a drama, rather than cramming everything in and tried to memorize it, I gave up the effort to memorize altogether, and I would just listen over and over and over and over again to my lines. After about between 60 and 80 repetitions, I found that I could just say the lines without even thinking. And the advantage of hearing them rather than trying to memorize them is that you get the cadence also. It's going to be, you're just, the way we do our dramas is we lip sync to pre-recording. So it's important to know the cadence. Otherwise your lips are going to be out of sync with the actual sound vibration. So I found that much more effective was to hear and to repeat over and over and over again without necessarily making the effort to memorize. And then it would just come to me. Most of us learned all the prayers, the samsara prayers that we chant in the morning, the guru, the 8 prayers to the guru. We learned the guru puja prayers, the prayers of Sri Guru Charana Padma. We learned the Nrsimha prayers, Namaste Narashringaya, not through memorization. It wasn't like when we first came to Krishna consciousness, we were so fired up. We said, I got to learn that prayer. And we spent hours and hours trying to memorize it. No, we just attended the temple day after day. And at the end of every arti, they sing the Nrsimha prayers. In the evening, they sing Kiba Jaya Jaya Gora Chandi. In the morning, they sing the Samsara prayer. So after about a month, or let's say 30 visitations, it's just there. You hadn't expended any energy to memorize it, and it just appeared. It just manifested from a deeper level than the mind, from the heart. The songs, the prayers had embedded themselves in the heart by repetitive audibilization. That's the way to create those grooves in the brain. Catchword nowadays is neuroplasticity. Everybody's interested in retaining their mental powers into old age. Too many people in the past had Parkinson's, they've had dementia, they've had Alzheimer's, and a lot of science, a lot of energy has been devoted towards how to sidestep that, counteract that in old age. And the answer is something called neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity means challenging your mind, getting your mind out of your comfort zone. I have my annual medical checkup coming up here pretty soon. And they give you an iPad and you go through all these mental exercises, these tests. They challenge you, your memory, your reactions, your recall. Last few years, for my age, I've been in the 95 percentile. The doctor shared a story with me 2 years ago. He said he just tested a CEO. He was the CEO of an international company, had hundreds and hundreds of employees under him. And when he was working, the demands on his time, the demands on his mental capacity were constant. So he remained sharp. But once he retired and came for his annual checkout and did the testing, he tested pretty low, like 40 percentile, 50 percentile for his age group. The doctor asked him, what have you been doing since retirement? And he said, well, watching TV and reading an occasional book. So he'd let up on his mental exercises and slipped. His mental powers were atrophying. Sometimes you hear people say, well, I don't have a good memory. True, I could never memorize verses like you do, or I could never memorize roles in a drama like you do. There's no such thing as good memory or bad memory. It's a myth. There isn't a good memory or bad memory. There's only a memory which is trained, and there's a memory which is untrained. If you push your memory, if you challenge your memory with repetitive audibilization, you can make significant progress. You can awaken up this latent, significant mental power. You've heard it said that we only use 5 or 10% of the brain. That's because we don't practice with repetition. We commit things to memory for a short-term purpose, but we don't have the lifelong habit of creating neural pathways. Everything we learn in school is only in order to pass the test. And as soon as we pass the test, we can't wait to forget about it. We can't wait to flush all that useless data out of our mind. And no wonder in old age, we become subject to Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and dementia. We haven't developed a lifelong habit of learning for its own sake, for the sake of your mind. And of course, if your mind dies, if your mind gets old, then everything else is going to follow, obviously. And if your mind stays young, if your mind stays fresh, if your mind stays excited, if your mind stays open, if your mind stays challenged day after day after day, you've strengthened your mind through exercises, then everything else will stay young for the maximum amount of time possible. So here, Gajendra is stressing the importance in his prayers to Lord Krishna of repetitive audibilization, to call out the name of the Lord. When we do kirtan, which is the congregational chanting of the Lord with instruments like the drum and harmonium, we sing loudly. We raise our voices. Hare Krishna, Hare Bol, Hosanna, Hallelujah. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. One should expend every effort to create those neural pathways. And if you're successful enough at creating the neural pathways by which the name of the Lord, form, the pastimes, the paraphernalia, the Sanskrit slokas which you've memorized, if you've embedded them deeply enough in your consciousness, beneath the mind, beneath the intellect, if you've tattooed your soul, so to speak, by repetitively and audibly hearing and chanting Shravanam Kirtanam, then the result is Vishnu Smarana. That's the goal. Purpose of hearing and chanting is Smarana, is to remember Lord Vishnu, especially at the time of death. Krishna Tadiya Pada Pankaja Radvaya Meminishu Manasha Kantodana Bidano Shmaranan Kutaste. Kula Shekhar, the Alwar from South India, prays that, Lord, now I'm young and I'm in full possession of my mental and intellectual and spiritual capabilities. Let me die now so that I can clearly and with all the strength and youth at my disposal call out the name of the Lord when that transitional period comes of leaving this body. In other words, he's saying we shouldn't waste our youth. We should spend our youth when we have good powers. We should chant, not waste our time in temporary pursuits. Things would have no permanent result, short-term goals. But we should spend our time, especially in the youth, when everything's plastic and pliable, to embed, to create grooves, canyons, grottos. Someone showed me a picture of the Grand Canyon. Raj comes to our Sunday feast, and he'd just come back from Grand Canyon, showed me a picture of him standing in the big crevice goes down there. That's what you want in your mind. You want, by repetitive audibly chanting, you want to create those neural pathways that are so deep They go beneath the mind, they go beneath the intellect, and they carve their place. Krishna carves his name in the stone like heart in such a way it can never be undone. If you do that, and even if, say, worst case scenario, you are unable to remember the name of the Lord, you, under the stress which occurs, the time of death, you lose your voice, you lose your eyesight, you lose your hearing. The body at the time of death is like a city of 9 gates, which is being attacked from all sides by barbarians. They're putting ladders up at the walls. They're smashing the gates. They're catapulting balls of fire to catch the thatch roofs on fire. In every way, the city with 9 gates is being assailed. It's being put under that much stress that the whole thing is going to collapse. That's what it's like at the time of death. The 9 gates of the 2 nostrils, the mouth, the ears, the eyes, and the genitals, and the anus. Death means a full-on, no holds barred assault, no prisoners taken, like the Mongols coming out of Asia. That's what death is. And so sometimes we haven't sufficiently created those neural pathways. We haven't sufficiently, with sufficient devotion. We may have done it robotically, may have done it parrot-like, but we haven't done it with devotion, which is actually what gives it sticking power, which embeds it. But still, no practice of chanting, no memorization of verses ever goes in vain. Not a tick of Krishna consciousness ever goes by the wayside. Everything eventually stands us in good stead. If one is unable to remember the name of the Lord at the time of leaving one's body, and this was the case with Gajendra. He had been King Indradumna, a great king, a great devotee, but due to no fault of his own, he was cursed by the sage Agastya to take birth as an elephant. He apparently did not remember the devotional service of his previous life because of that, the force of ignorance covering his soul in the form of the body of the elephant. He lived for many years. He grew up as a baby elephant, an adolescent elephant, a teenage elephant. He challenged all the other male elephants in huge fights, epic fights, to dominate and become the alpha elephant. He got wives one by one, children one by one, grandchildren one by one. Quite a bit of time. And remember, he's on the heavenly planets where their one day is equal to our 6 months. There's a lot of time which has elapsed during which he had not chanted the name of the Lord. And yet, when the circumstances aligned themselves in such a way that his life was on the line and all of his material comforts and accoutrements and all of his influence and all of his ego were brought down, were shattered by the grace of the Lord, who appeared to him in the form of the crocodile. At that time, the repetitive, audible, devotionally driven chanting which he'd performed in his past life comes to the surface. It once again manifests itself. The chanting of the holy names, if you have a human form, if you're listening to this, we put you on notice. The chanting of the holy names is so powerful, especially with devotion, especially with repetition, especially audibly. It's like on New Year's Day, we have our Japathon every year. We chanted 3,600,000 names of God. It's a great way to start the year. It's a wake-up call. Quantity does matter. Quality matters. Repetition matters. You can't just chant the holy name of the Lord once, call it done. On New Year's Day, you can't take a shower and then think that that shower will last you the whole year long. In fact, on New Year's Day, you might want to shower 5 or 6 times to set the tone that if I'm going to be clean in 2024, I have to shower at least once a day. At least once a day. So when we have our Japathon on the first day of the year, we're putting ourselves on notice. Caru, You have to, repetition, quantity, audibilization, these things do matter. At the same time, you have to do everything consciously. You have to do them with devotion. Recall, Mother Yasoda, Krishna got himself into trouble by doing mischief while Mother Yasoda was tending to the water which was boiling over the pots on the stove. She couldn't do her service to Krishna and keep Krishna out of mischief at the same time. So she had to choose. Am I going to chase Krishna around the house all day and neglect my duties, which are themselves devotional service to Krishna? Or am I going to do my duties as devotional service to Krishna and let Krishna run wild? She decided she had to temporarily restrain Krishna. She got a big, heavy, 1,000-pound grinding mortar like a blacksmith's anvil. She got some rope. And her intention was to tie Krishna, at least for a half an hour or so, until she could get on top of her household duties, tie Krishna around the abdomen to this huge grinding mortar. But when she put the rope around the mortar and around Krishna, she saw that she was 2 inches too short. So she went and got another piece of rope. She tied the 2 ropes together in a sheep bend, which is what I learned in Boy Scouts. But the rope was still 2 inches too short. And she did this over and over. The rope was 2 inches too short. Similarly, we need to chant. We need to chant consistently. We need to chant repetitively. We need to chant daily. We need to chant audibly, but we also need to chant with devotion, because we're not attaining Krishna conscious by the chanting. Krishna conscious is not something you attain. Athapi te deva padambhujaya prasada leshana janati tatvam bhangavani nachanyo ekam vicharin vichanpan. The secret to remembering Krishna and going to Krishna at the time of death comes from Krishna himself. You have to chant in such a way that Krishna wants to gather you back to him, back to Godhead. Krishna wants and qualifies you to attain his association once again. You cannot do that without chanting by devotion. That whatever Mother Yasoda did, however many pieces of rope she had, however heavy the grinding mortar was, however hard she exerted herself, or how much perspiration was running, she was not able on her own to bind the Lord. She was only able to bind the Lord, to capture the Lord, when the Lord finally agreed to let her do so. The Lord finally agreed to let the 2 ends of the rope join so that she could tie a knot. And even then, as soon as she went away, Krishna dragged the mortar between 2 huge trees and broke them down, from which 2 shiny, luminous beings came. But that's a story for another day. We're going to become Krishna conscious and make the human form of life successful. We have to chant consciously, not robotically, not take it for granted. And if that's the case, you chant repetitively, you chant audibly under the orders of the spiritual master in the association of devotees, that practice never goes in vain. It will come to you when you need it the most, just as it did come to Gajendra when he was caught within the jaws of the crocodile. It also manifests itself to Ajamil. Ajamil had chanted as a young Brahmin boy in the pious home of his mother and father. He'd chanted, he'd done puja, he'd remembered the prayers of the Brahma Samhita, Ishvara Parama Krishna Sachidananda Anadiriya Govinda Sarvakaranakam Om Ata Nityo Narayanaya Kamayati Narayana Prajayate Narayana Rudajayate Narayana Prajapati Prajayate Narayana Dvadasya Dvita Dvitiya Paradre Narayana Eva Prabhujante Narayana Prabhadyante Yavam. That's a Narayana Upanishad, Purusha Shukta Om Sasha Shirsha Purusha Saksa Sahasabad Sabamam Vishata Chatishta Dishangaram Purushevargam Sarvam Yaksputam Yakstavabhyam Atamita Sheshana Yananato Taroti. The 1,000 names of Vishnu, Bhuta Bhatva Parakara. Many South Indians have committed to memory the 1,000 names of Vishnu. When I say committed to memory, I don't mean they can just sit down and regurgitate them. I mean that every day in the pre-dawn hours before the light of the sun manifests itself, after rising, taking a shower, and anointing the body with tilak, the South Indian Brahmin will sit down before his home altar, and with great devotion, he will chant from memory the 107 verses called Vishnu Sahasranam, the 1,000 names of Vishnu, with devotion, with repetition, with audibilization. Similarly with Jamil, he had dedicated his youth. It wasn't even necessarily his choice. It was probably a condition. His father probably told him that as long as you're living in my house, you will chant these mantras, you will worship the deities. So he did it, either by choice or by force, maybe a little bit of both. But then when puberty hit and those hormones got overwhelmingly strong, he actually abandoned his beautiful, pious, Krishna conscious devotee wife, took up with a prostitute, engaged in intoxication, gambling, supported his illegitimate children from the common law marriage with crimes, lived his whole life that way. Didn't think of Krishna once. You might even think that he was running away from Krishna as fast and as far as he could. And yet, when old age, when his city of 9 gates was under a full-on assault by the soldiers of time and old age and debility, he, in a panic, Yamaduta Raptar Bhima Shara, Sada Shara, Sakran Munchimirat. You know what? Most people who have lived their life unprofitably, who have simply lived their life like animals for sense gratification, it is said that when death comes and they see the Yamadutas, these rough-looking, gruff, brutal servants of Yamaraj come to put a noose around the subtle body and drag it away for punishment. Sakran Bhutamuna, usually one loses so much composure, so much dignity that one passes stool and urine simultaneously. Jamil was just at that point, absolutely terrified, realized that he's wasted his whole life, even though he had a good start, he blew it. But to his credit, that earlier training, that earlier repetition, that earlier audibilization came once again to the surface, and he called out the name of his youngest son, Narayana, Narayana, Narayana. And there are several verses to this effect, the efficacy of chanting. Even after a long period of forgetfulness in the 6th canto of the Bhagavatam, I am Hikritine Visho Janmakoti Yadvijara Nama Shastinamare. One repetition, audibilization. Notice Ajamil didn't chant in his mind. Just the opposite. He cried out in desperation, in hysteria, in panic. He cried out as loudly as he could, Narayanaha. The reason that he did that was not accidental or random. It was because of the practice that he had exercised in his early life. It is now coming back to him at the crucial moment. We learn from this that practice, heartfelt, conscious chanting never, ever, ever goes in vain. A good case in point is Gajendra. Another good case in point is Ajamil. And of course, finally, we'll conclude with reciting again the example of Mother Yasoda. Mother Yasoda was able to capture Krishna only by Krishna's grace. For Mother Yasoda to bind Krishna required Krishna's mercy. And so whatever we do, whether it be chanting japa or doing sankirtan or cooking or shopping, receiving guests or worshiping the deity or painting a picture, whatever we do in Krishna consciousness, we have to keep in mind that through this service, I have to bind Krishna. If by doing this service, robotically, parrot-like, unmindfully, it doesn't bind Krishna, then that service is not successful. And when all the devotional activities, and there are many, there are 78 broad categories of devotional activities. as described by Srila Rupa Goswami in the Nectar Devotion. No matter which one of those 78 activities in devotional service one is doing, one should do it one-pointedly. Vyabhishatmaka buddhi, ekakuru bahushakayana buddhyo vyavashayana. One should be single-mindedly purposeful in performing any and all of the devotional activities, and that will result in Krishna being attracted to you, Krishna intervening at the crucial moment, Krishna bringing your past devotional service to the surface and using it as a platform to take you back to home, back to Godhead. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Well, thank you all, even though I have not been there for you for the last 2 or 3 weeks. Once we jump back on board, all of our stalwarts have magically appeared. Carmen, Brent, John Malik, Natasha, Govinda Dave, William Griffith, Brent, did I mention Brent? My Bobby. Not only have you reappeared, but we've got some verses here that we'll just spend the last few minutes sharing. Of course, you can read this yourself, but we put this also on YouTube. So I want to, people that access this talk through YouTube, they wouldn't have the opportunity to see what you all have written. So Carmen, who in the past has spun some very, very sophisticated verses, the duration of sound vibration leads devotees to profound elation. Death can be defeated when Krishna's name is repeated. Chant so Krishna can't. Ignore your holy rant. Bind him with your sound, so in Vrindavan you'll be found. That's so sweet. That's so sweet. Man. Yes, give Carmen some hearts and some stars, you all. Okay, now Brent, just above her. Repetition in devotion from the past can return fast. It will help you recall, even if you fall. Yes, let's have some more stars, thumbs up. And he says the same thing even more briefly, just above that. He says, repetition with devotion every day. There is no other way. And above that, Brent, who's back from Bolivia, learning is attained by a trained brain, create neural pathways so the memory stays. Love it. Love it. And everybody, Bhai Bobby said that on her Facebook page yesterday, she got, her words were 1 million birthday wishes. Added to that are all the birthday wishes today from Natasha, from John, from Govinda, from Brent, from William, everybody, Carmen, everybody's wishing you a happy birthday, Bhai Bobby. 78 years young. What a great soul that I've been privileged to spend the last 53 years of Krishna conscious missionary work with. Okay, and speaking of that, I have to rush her over for eye surgery this morning. So I'll take your leave. Rob, before we go, you've been spinning verses for probably about the better part of 3 years now. So you're the grandfather. You're the originator. You're the cause of all causes, so to speak. So do you want to share with us what you have today?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, it's good to have you back.
Thank
and
you.
Happy birthday to Vaibhavi Mataji.
Haribo.
Okay, do your spiritual master proud and chant repeatedly out loud.
Excellent.
Hear and chant consistently for better neuroplasticity. Put your japa on repeat and make the grooves deeper than deep.
It's good stuff here.
You must chant with devotion to escape the causal ocean. Devotionally resonate the holy sound, and in love Krishna is bound.
Wow. Now that just summarizes the whole thing. The whole 45 minutes, you just said it in 10 seconds.
But we need the repetition to make those grooves deep.
There you go. There you go. A lesson well learned. If I'm the teacher, then you guys are certainly the most qualified students. You've learned the lesson that we've tried to impart today. Pranams. I seek the dust from all of your lotus feet and look forward to coming back tomorrow. And when we come back tomorrow, by Bobby's vision in one eye, we'll be back to 2020, if not better. So let me get that underway so that we can have, even though parts of her body are 78, she's going to get at least one new eye today for all practical purposes. So take your leave. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.